by playing his last round yesterday, Cedric guaranteed himself the overall 1 seed for the tournament, so he'll be able to make be on the play every match which he has to play in this turn in the top 8.
And we see that he was conflicted for a bit, but ultimately decided that he was going to mulligan. And Toby decides to keep it fair. He's also going to go down 6 cards.
Yeah. So with that play draw decision that he made, the other undefeated player in our top 8 is Greg Peliquin. Because Peliquin took a second draw, Greg fell down to the 3rd seed in the tournament. So actually not too far at all. So in that situation, really, Greg will probably also mostly get to be on the play, with the exception if he ends up meeting Cedric.
Yeah, and it's actually really good for him that he is in a different bracket from Cedric. That's a matchup that should favor Cedric, and so Greg getting to be in this other bracket where he's probably going to get to play the mirror match a couple of times, which we saw. He was equipped to win when we had him featured yesterday. I think sets him up well to be for a road to the finals. And so I think there's a pretty good chance that we end up seeing the first seed and the first seed and the 3rd seed, but the 2 undefeated players from yesterday face each other in the finals.
So interestingly enough, we have essentially 6 mid-range decks, 1 Revelation deck, and then 1 aggro deck in the top 8. Cedric's deck is the only Burning Tree Emissary deck in the top 8, and it's even not really a traditional Burning Tree Emissary deck. It's not a Blitz deck. Because that when you're looking at both players mulliganing here, the mulliganing probably does favor Cedric. His deck's really able to operate on fewer resources than Toby's is able to. A lot of the mid-range decks, especially when you're playing a deck that plays Farseek, a mulligan can be really difficult for you because it's really, the idea of mana ramp is when you have a Farseek, ideally let's make a 4-drop on turn 3, but to have that you both need the 4-drop, you have to have the 3rd land and the Farseek.
Yep.
And when you have fewer cards, the chances that all that comes together gets a lot fewer. A lot of times Farseek will really just be, a land drop that costs you the mana for the turn.
Yeah, and also, a lot of Toby's plan in the early game is to just 1-for-1 Cedric and slow him down until, Toby's able to get his Thragtusk engine going or get, Olivia on the board to try to stabilize. And so there's a lot more danger that he's not going to draw the right answers to answer what Cedric has, whereas Cedric's deck is, almost entirely threats.
Yeah. Toby, both players kept on 6.
Yep. So Cedric leads off with a Forest into an Arbor Elf. Toby is leading off with an untapped Overgrown Tomb, which probably has a mana creature of his own.
Yeah. So the ramp start is exactly what Toby would like to see. Because he's on a 6-card hand, it's possible that he didn't get, his decision will be a little bit more difficult. He won't have perfect information. He certainly kept him with an Accelerator, which is great for him in the matchup. One question will be, will he be able to ramp into something to stabilize?
Yep. And so we see Cedric use a Bonfire of the Damned to take out Toby's Accelerator. And it looks like Toby doesn't really have very much gas of his own. He's got a Bonfire of the Damned in his hand and all lands. So at this point, he's really falling behind a little bit, and as long as Cedric is able to find a follow-up, he's...
The danger there is because Cedric cast that Bonfire off of Burning Tree Emissaries, an indicator that Cedric does not have red mana right now.
Yep.
Remember, his deck is foremost a red-green aggro deck.
So Cedric at this point, he's got access to 4 green mana, essentially, but he's not going to be able to cast a Falconwrath Aristocrat or a Thundermaw Hellkite. Toby, we're looking a little bit more at his hand, and he continues to draw lands. He's got that Bonfire. Looks like maybe he's waiting to fire it off for 5 mana in order to kill the 2 creatures that Cedric has. I think, though, it might make sense to just kill the Arbor Elf right now. I think like the best you're going to get out of the Bonfire in hand is killing an Accelerator.
I think certainly now that Cedric commits a second one, I would agree on that situation. The thing is that Cedric's deck does top out at 5, and at this point, you're not really doing much damage by killing mana creatures. The Bonfire is really great in the early game, but especially in Toby's situation, he may want to save that Bonfire to essentially clean up the board, which now that it's a 2-for-1, I think it's a fine play, but last turn I think it's very acceptable for him to hang on to it at that point.
And so one thing to keep in mind there is the Arbor Elf potentially allows him to go from 0 red mana to 2 red mana when he has a stomping round, which is potentially dangerous. But
Thundermaw Hellkite is, Cedric deck does play 4 Thundermaw Hellkites.
Yeah. But so we see Toby clear off part of the board with the Bonfire, and Cedric goes ahead, attacks with his Burning Tree Emissary, then casts a Borderland Ranger, gets a Mountain, and now has his mana engine online. Everything is a nice, clean top deck for him.
Yeah, Cedric appears to be a little light on threats. Right now, obviously, Toby doesn't have any answers, which is favoring Cedric. Toby's at 9 life. Cedric has a lot of basically game closers in 4 Falconeth Aristocrat and 4 Thundermaw Hellkite. As of right now, he hasn't been able to draw any of those, and it is giving Toby time to draw a Huntmaster or an Olivia Voldaren, which will make the game much more difficult for Cedric.
So Toby draws a land. I believe last turn he drew a Curse of Death's Hold, and he's going to play that right now. That's going to slow Cedric down a little bit. The most important thing about that, though, is that it shuts off Falconwrath Aristocrat as a live draw.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the sort of...
And right off the top, Cedric miracles of Thundermaw Hellkite.
Hit you for 7, down to 2, and Toby...
Just for 6.
For 6?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, sorry, for 6. So down to 3. Toby needs to draw a way to deal with that Thundermaw Hellkite. He does. He gets a Victim of Night, I believe.
Notable, there's only 1 Curse of Death's Hold in Toby's main deck, so Cedric doesn't have to worry about the backbreaking play of Toby, at some point here dropping a 2nd Curse of Death's Hold.
I'm sorry, it was not a kill spell he drew, I don't think.
I believe he has both Murder and Huntmaster of the Fells. He's actually willing to shock to go down to 1 here, so he's essentially washing on the damage from Huntmaster. The question then would be whether or not he has a kill spell. He does play 1 Victim of Night in main, which seems like what he'd be looking at here.
Yeah. So it is a Victim of Night in his hand, so he's going to be able to take out the Thundermaw Hellkite. And by waiting to kill the Thundermaw Hellkite, he potentially entices an attack by Cedric's brown creatures into the wolves. Probably not.
Yeah, they're both 1/1s right now, so that would be a suicide charge. The worry here is that Cedric has a lot of draws that are quite live. He has 3 more Thundermaw Hellkites. He has 4 Flinthoof Boars, which is close to lethal right now. Would put Cedric down to 1. He also has 4 Gore Clan Rampagers, which the blood rush on that would be enough to end the game as well.
Yep. And of course, a Miracle Bonfire would have done it as well.
Right.
So Cedric,
actually, a non-Miracle Bonfire almost does it.
That's true, because we do have the 1/1 creatures.
Well, yeah, no, it does do it because it would kill the Huntmaster
and the wolf and allow the Burning Tree Emissary to get through.
Mm-hmm.
So Cedric is sitting there saying, "Why would you shock yourself? You must have something in your hand, but what can you have?"
Well, Cedric has to assume that the dragon's dead here.
Yeah.
The game's too easy if Toby doesn't have an answer for the Hellkite.
I think what he's working on in his head is, what kill spell can you have? Does he remember, having seen Toby's deck list, does he remember that there is a Victim of Night in his deck? Because a lot of the other 2-mana removal, like Dreadbore and Mizzian Mortars, is actually sorcery speed.
Interestingly enough, this game, if Cedric doesn't pull off the kill here quickly, this is going to be a little bit of a difficult game for Cedric. Toby's last card in hand is a Murder, and because all of Cedric's threats are creature-based, will be difficultly hard for Cedric to push that final damage through if he doesn't this turn. He'll really be relying on Bonfire to do that, which I think will actually can potentially give Toby time to crawl back into the game.
Yeah, and there is the threat of hitting running haste creatures here, but you're right that if Cedric isn't able to close this out now, it's going to be very, very difficult, and he's essentially drawing to 3 outs. So Cedric deep in the tank. Be interesting to know what his 2 cards are here, what he's contemplating, and looks. Oh no, we're gonna do some math. This is something that you don't see when Cedric streams online. Cedric is, especially in top 8 where it's untimed, he's a very deliberate player. He likes to make sure that he knows what his opponent's best options are, and so you see this sort of thoughtful approach to the game when he's on camera, when he's in a live event. When he's playing on Magic Online, he's a little bit more loosey-goosey. So we do see the attack with the Thundermaw Hellkite and the expected Victim of Night from Toby on that Thundermaw Hellkite. Now Cedric has to contemplate what his follow-up is, what he can do to get out of this spot that he's in. It seems so close.
Yeah, well, I mean, he still has the bonfire out if he needs it. He may want to try to make sure that the Huntmaster doesn't flip. If Huntmaster flips, he will be on more or less a 3-turn clock.
Yeah, well, so he doesn't have to worry about that right now because the Victim of Night was cast. But Cedric doesn't have many instants.
He's going to go ahead and Dreadbore.
And so that was probably what he was thinking about previously in his turn. He was saying, I'm going to Dreadbore this, I'm going to Dreadbore the Huntmaster of the Fells,
yes.
And does it make sense for me to attack for 1 and suicide one of my guys in?
Right. Interestingly enough, he opted to make just that lone attack. The other option was, he could have dropped Toby to 1 life here.
Yeah. And so, also post-combat, Cedric plays a Flinthoof Boar, which is a 2/2 right now. Toby draws for the turn.
Well, Toby has, with Murder in hand, is very tenuously stable right now. He still would love to draw another Huntmaster or a Thragtusk, or even a Planeswalker of some sort.
Yeah. So Toby draws a Mizium Mortars for the turn, uses that on the Flinthoof Boar.
He's 1 red short of overloading it.
Yeah.
No, he's not. Actually, he did have the option to overload it, it appears.
But he wants to make sure that he doesn't die to a hasty threat,
exactly.
so he gets to keep the murder up this way. And effectively, the Wolf token is able to hold off these 2 1/1s for right now. So Toby is stabilized and is probably ahead, but his lead is not secure by any means.
Yeah. All right, see Gyre Sage from Cedric Phillips. So yeah, both players are essentially just racing the top decks here. Yeah. Toby has a lot more live top decks. I would say his live top decks here would be a Grook Primal Hunter, Thragtusk, Huntmaster of the Fells, and even to a certain degree, Liliana of the Veil.
I think Olivia is probably a pretty live top deck as well.
Oh, yes. So yeah, Olivia would certainly be added to that. So he has Cedric's outs really are just going to be just a bonfire, or if he actually can just out creature Toby enough times. So as we see right now, if he can manage to evolve both his Gyre Sages, then Cedric does have a potentially lethal swing.
Yeah. Another out for Cedric is that he's got 1 Kessig Wolfrun in his deck, which will demand instant speed answers from Toby pretty much every turn.
Kessig Wolfrun something Toby's really not equipped to answer. If Cedric draws that, that should be good enough as well.
So we're at this point we're at 4 outs that definitely win Cedric the game, and then a couple of redraws. Yet another Gyre Sage for Cedric.
Remember, those are all 0/1s due to Curse of Death's Hold.
Yeah, he's actually in a pretty good position if he draws a creature with power, because he will be able to attack with all of these 1 power guys, and enough will get through to put Toby down. Toby draws a Farseek for the turn and casts it. Is there any value in keeping that in your hand and just using it as a bluff to make Cedric have to worry about you having 2 removal spells in hand?
So the idea, there's some value to keeping extra cards in your hand because it's a Farseek. So the reason you'd have to wonder is what you're actually doing with extra mana, what the utility of this land is. You wouldn't play it just so you don't draw a land, but because he's playing Olivia Voldaren, I think the turn he draws Olivia, he'll want to have as many activations as possible. And in this situation, because of that, I think that probably outweighs the value of a bluff, because even an extra removal spell, if Cedric believes that Toby has it, doesn't particularly affect how Cedric's going to play the game. It might, he might actually fool Cedric, but it won't get him the same advantage as that extra land possibly could.
So Cedric draws a Falkenrath Aristocrat for the turn, which it looked like it was a dead draw, but by casting it, it immediately dies to the Curse of Death's Hold, but it evolves all 3 of his Gyre Sages, which is enough to get through for 4 damage, putting Toby to -1 life. And Toby is visibly frustrated with the number of sort of dead draws he had towards the end of the game. He knew he was drawing much more live than Cedric was, and he just did not get there. So we're going to cut back to the booth here, and we have one of your favorite segments out there, which is the trivia segment. We're going to be giving away is it 3 months of Star City
3
Games
months
Premium?
of Star SCG Premium.
Yeah.
So if you haven't watched with us before, though I imagine a lot of you are waking up in the morning to watch an open have. How this will work is we'll ask you a trivia question, and if you need to tweet the answer, and you have to put the hashtag SCG Premium, you have it on the bottom of your screen there, on your answer. And among all the correctly tweeted answers with that hashtag, one will be selected, and we'll read the name on air, and that player to receive 3 months of Star City Games Premium. We continue to do this during every match in the top 8, with prizes progressively getting more up through the finals.
Okay. So one thing that I'm really excited about is something we announced at Star City Games Milwaukee last week, which is Star City is going to be running a Grand Prix in Miami, Florida. It's going to be June 20th through 30th. And one of my favorite artists is going to be at that Grand Prix. It's his first time ever at a U.S. Grand Prix. And when I got back into Magic a few years ago, there's this iconic card in M10, Baneslayer Angel, which is, an awesome card, and it's got really beautiful artwork, and this guy is the artist for it. So what we would like you to do is, the trivia is, this artist, featured artist for GP Miami, coming to sign his first time at a US GP, artist for Baneslayer Angel, artist for the new artwork of Sarah Angel that was an M10. Go ahead and...
We're looking for the name of the artist. And you have the name of the artist, and make sure that you have hashtag SCG Premium on your tweet, otherwise it will not be eligible.
Yep. And so if you're interested in finding out about GP Miami, about the guests that we have there, you can go and check out the website for it. It's magicgp.com. It's possible that the answer to this trivia question may be on there somewhere. So if you don't know the answer, you can find out the answer at magicgp.com.
All right. So let's bring you back into our match for Game 2. So we have Cedric up 1-0, pulling one where he got most of his damage early in and struggled for a way to find the last damage. Eventually was able to overload his opponent with 1 power creatures to push the last 3 through. Cedric has been still undefeated with his deck for the tournament. His sideboard, I would imagine, against a Jund sort of deck, is largely the same as his, it's largely unchanged. His deck's very well positioned against Jund to begin with. When you look at the cards in his deck right now, I would see probably things he's looking at are cards like he could board in Rakdos's Return. If he can pull one off early enough, because the deck does have as much mana ramp, if not more, than Toby Cain's deck, Rakdos's Return can be particularly backbreaking. He also has the option to put in cards like Garruk Relentless, or even I think or Domi Rod, if he wants to try to get enough card advantage here. I think would be hesitant to board in cards like his own Thragtusks. Getting into a Thragtusk battle with Jund is something that's really not going to play towards Cedric's game plan.
Yeah. Is it possible he brings in the Zealous Conscripts as a way to answer an opposing Thragtusk and get through that last bits of damage, or do you think he's just not worried about that his 4s and 5s are already good enough at getting past the creatures that Toby has?
Well, I would say, so if we're boarding in Zealous Conscripts, my guess is that he doesn't use it in this matchup. It certainly is fine. It's generally you'd want to steal something like an Angel of Serenity or something very large with it. You could use it in this matchup. The worry is that Cedric already is playing 4 Thundermaw Hellkites, 4 Falconwrath Aristocrats, and so as a result, he really needs to make sure he doesn't just keep loading up on 5s.
Yep.
It's a good 5 to be sure, but because Toby's deck has a lot of mana creatures in it, there's also a chance that if he plays that 5, that the creature won't even get through.
Yeah. So on Toby's side, he's got a couple ground seals that he definitely wants to take out, and he might decide that he wants to take out his Garruk Primal Hunters. And I think that he's going to bring in his Olivia Voldar, and basically the rest of his sideboarding is going to be, I want to bring in some more removal. So Bonfire of the Damned is a possibility. The 2 Pillar of Flames to deal with early accelerants and to deal with some of the 2-drops is a possibility, although a lot of Cedric's creatures get out of that range pretty quickly. And then the Curse of Death's Hold that he has in the sideboard might be a card that he wants to consider bringing in. It's pretty high up on the curve, but having an answer, a proactive answer to Falconwrath Aristocrat, seems like a good thing in this matchup. So it looks like we've got a couple results from the other matches. In the other part of this bracket, we have Jordan 1-0 with his blue-white-red deck against Austin's Jund deck. And in the other bracket, we have Greg Peliquin 1-0 versus Brendan Gould in the Junk Reanimator mirror.
Right, remember Greg Peliquin's the other undefeated player from the Swiss. So both Cedric and Greg continuing their undefeated streak in the top 8 so far.
Yeah, and no result yet from Eric and Michael's match of Junk Reanimator versus Junk Tokens. So it looks like we're all shuffled up. We've presented, we've shuffled our opponent's decks, and we're drawing our 7-card hands. And Toby, being on the play here, is going to get the first decision about whether a mulligan or not. So we've got Olivia, we've got Bonfire, we had an Overgrown Tomb. I think I saw one other removal spell in there. There's a Thragtusk. Looks like there may just be 1 or 2 lands in there, and a lot of kind of expensive spells. I'm not sure if Toby's going to be able to keep that. Don't know the exact 7 there.
Yeah, he looks like he's putting it back. The Olivia Voldon's a great card for the matchup, but it doesn't look like he actually, with this speedy made a decision, doesn't look like he actually had a reasonable keep there.
Yeah. So when you're opening up a 7-card hand as Toby, or a 6-card hand now, what are you looking for? I think what I would be looking for there is, like, 2 to 3 lands, maybe 4 lands, and at least 1 spell that's interacting early, and then hopefully a trump like Olivia Voldaren. But I think I really want to make sure that I'm going to be able to interact with Cedric with a removal spell in the first 3 turns.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously the answer when you're on a mulligan is that you want lands plus spells. You're hoping that you don't go to 5. But given that, with a deck especially like Toby's deck, it really at that point it depends on the answer of what you want depends on what kind of deck you have. When you're the control deck or a mid-range deck, you would very much prefer to have a land-heavy hand as opposed to a land-light hand in this matchup. Mm-hmm. Because all your cards that when you have cards like Olivia that are trump cards, or cards that really, you don't need too many high-impact cards to win the game. You want to make sure that you have the ability to cast them if you draw one of them. So because of that, he's worried more about deck consistency than not having enough interactive spells. He really only needs 1 early game spell just to prevent himself from getting run over.
Okay. So we're continuing to shuffle up. Cedric has kept his 7. We can see here that Cedric doesn't seem super excited about what's going on here, but that may just be him putting on his game face and not giving away anything. And now we've got the death stare off camera. I assume that that's at Glenn Jones, and that it's completely deserved. All right, and there's the shuffle, and we're going to see if we have an acceptable 6 for Toby. So 3 and 3. And a red spell, a land, Olivia.
Well, it looks like he has that Olivia, which is exactly what
he wants. So we've got a Thragtusk, Olivia, and it looks like 3 lands and 1 other spell. So that's going to get us started. So we've got a Blood Crypt from Toby. Cedric follows with a Blood Crypt.
Yeah, and this is a pretty good hand for Toby to be starting off on. He drew an Arbor Elf on turn 2. I don't know if he actually has a Forest, so it's a little awkward of a draw right now.
Yeah, it looks like the last card in Toby's hand is a Pillar of Flame.
Right, so he has an early removal spell and he has trumps, which is great.
Yeah.
If he gets he's hoping to probably have a land that's a Forest here, but if he draws one, that will be a Thragtusk, still a turn 4 Thragtusk.
Yeah, and he's going to be very happy to use this Pillar of Flame to stunt Cedric's development, get in for 1, and then he's going to play a Dragonskull Summit.
So a very good start here for Toby. It still needs a little bit more, but he certainly has he's given himself a lot of opportunity in the game.
So Cedric draws a 2nd Gorklan Rampager for the turn. He's going to play a Borderland Ranger here. Go ahead and get a land. So he's got some gas in his hand, but I don't think he has any of the big, hasty creatures that his deck is really built around.
Well, this is a good example where Cedric's deck really deviates from a deck like Experiment Jund. His deck has the ability to go big. Right now, if you're an aggro deck, you'd be pretty concerned by the fact that it's turn 4 and Toby's still at 20. Cedric's deck isn't as concerned as it kind of deals its damage in 4s and 5s once it decides to start dealing damage. So in that sense, Toby's only still 3 or 4 swings away from dead.
So Toby draws and untaps, and I'm not sure if he's gotten a 4th land yet. Yeah, he's drawn yet another pillar, and I think he's going to fire it off on the Borderland Ranger, just keep the board clear, get in for one. And so he's got a Thragtusk, and he's got Olivia, and he's got one other spell. It may be a second Thragtusk. It looks like it's a second Thragtusk.
Yeah, Toby doesn't really mind pillaring. Normally you'd try to not pillar a card like Borderland Ranger. In this matchup, almost all of Cedric's the pillars are just meant to hit early drops.
Yep.
And all right, there's and so at that point, there's no utility 2/2 that Toby's really excited to hit.
So Toby draws his fourth land, and luckily it's a forest, so he gets to accelerate with his Arbor Elf and cast that Thragtusk. He took 2 from having the Shockland come into play on untapped, but then gained 5 life back with Thragtusk. And now Cedric is faced with the decision of how he's going to deal with this Thragtusk. So he's going to attack in with the Gore Clan Rampager, and by blood rushing with the other Gore Clan Rampager in his hand, he gets the Thragtusk off the board, which means that the Gore Clan Rampager he has is going to be able to sort of dominate the 3/3 beast token that Toby gets back.
Cedric, you said, how can he deal with the Thragtusk? And I think one of the things is that, his deck doesn't really deal with Thragtusk. It still does plow through or over Thragtusk. This hand is going to be a pretty difficult hand for Cedric to beat. The fact that Toby has another Thragtusk and then an Olivia Voldaren. Cedric looks like he has quite a few lands right now, but even with creatures, this would be a very difficult hand for him.
Yeah, it's possible that Cedric's hand is entirely lands now.
It does. Yeah, I think it is.
Maybe one spell. It's either 4 lands or 3 lands and a Gore Clan Rampager, I think. So Toby draws another land, which is welcome for him. He's going to be able to use all of his mana with this Olivia Voldaren. He goes ahead and casts it, and actually I think he wanted to. Well, it probably doesn't matter, but he probably wanted to use the Arbor Elf to do that so that he has 2 mana up for it. The Arbor Elf actually isn't a mana ability. It's a targeted ability that goes on the stack, and so you can't. Cedric would have a chance to respond to this untapping of the land if it mattered.
Right, but it doesn't actually, I don't think it makes too much of a difference there because Cedric would still have the opportunity to respond to, say that if Cedric had a Searing Spear, which he doesn't play, he would still have the opportunity to respond to the triggered ability. I can't think of a specific situation. You're right, though, it does give him an extra window.
So if it matters for Olivia to be able to ping something, in response to untapping with the Arbor Elf, Cedric could actually kill the Olivia, and then the mana wouldn't be available for him to ping. It turns out that doesn't matter, but it's sort of like, let's make sure that we play optimally at all times, even if it doesn't matter situation. So Toby is able to finish off that Gore Clan Rampager with a ping from Olivia Voldaren and the block from the beast token, and Olivia is now getting in. He's got 6 mana available to him right now, which he can use to triple ping with Olivia if it needs be, or ping and then the next turn steal with it. And I think at this point we're going to see him play the second Thragtusk from his hand.
He may play the second Thragtusk. At the same time, he may just continue to press his advantage with Olivia Voldaren. He knows that Cedric's deck has the ability to Blood Rush and play a fair amount of haste creatures. So the safer play for Toby may just be to only use Olivia. That way it leaves him up an answer to say if Cedric has something like hasted Thundermaw Hellkites, or maybe his hand has a ton of Blood Rush. There are very few things actually that Toby has to worry about at 15 life. But to a certain point, I think just continuing to leave up Olivia mana and then stealing Cedric's board is a better way to prevent him from getting outs. That said, this play is also great.
Yeah. So Toby does play the Thragtusk, and he leaves up mana to activate Olivia. So he's anticipating using Olivia at the end of Cedric's turn to turn something into a vampire and then be able to steal it on the next turn. Cedric draws the Thundermaw Hellkite, casts it, attacks for 5, bringing Toby back down to 15. But then Toby goes ahead and pings the Thundermaw Hellkite at the end of turn, making Olivia a little bit bigger, setting up to steal it.
Right, and Olivia's really, the pinnacle of Toby's late game in this matchup. Cedric, remember, does play 2 Dread boards, and probably possibly a third out of the board if he expects. He's probably very aware of the role that Olivier Voldaren plays in this matchup, and I would expect that Cedric's playing the third Dread board because his deck is fairly light on ways to deal with an Olivier Voldaren.
Yeah, and of course Cedric knows that Toby has the 3 Olivias in his main deck and the 4th in the board. So
we see a Miracle Bonfire.
Yeah, and Cedric scoops it up in response to that.
Right. That even though it's interesting, even though Toby could have stolen the Thunder Hellkite, that's a safer play because it plays around a possible removal spell that Cedric could draw.
Yep. So we're gonna shuffle up for game 3 here. Each of the players are thinking about whether they want to change how they sideboard. It looks like Cedric, if he hasn't brought in the Dreadboard, I'd imagine that he would bring in the 3rd Dreadboard from his side after seeing how impactful the Olivia was there. Are there any changes that you want to make based on whether you're on the play versus the draw with these decks?
There's very few matchups right now in Standard where I feel like a play-draw-mulligan decision is particularly correct, especially in a lot of these matchups where they're somewhat mid-rangey. I would say the function of a card is much more important than the tempo of it. I would imagine the players just stay largely the same with their boarding changes.
Okay. So, how do we still like Cedric for this match? Do we think that he's likely to get there in game 3?
I still do like how Cedric has played this match. The Jund deck has a couple cards which can really beat him, as we see Olivier Voldaren do there.
Yep.
But at the same time, Cedric has about as many answers to Olivia as Toby has Olivia's. And outside of that card, I think Cedric's deck has the ability still to push past Thragtusks so well that I would expect him to be able to do that again.
Okay. So we have another sort of match update. The Greg Pelican-Brendan Gould match, which is the mirror match, random mirror match, has gone to game 3. And we will keep you guys updated as we get results from the other matches.
Absolutely.
And actually we have one other match. Michael Nixon and Eric Thompson, the Junk Reanimator versus Junk Tokens deck. They are up to game 3 now. So it's all tied up there.
So we have plenty of, almost all our matches in the top 8 going to game 3. So yeah, all 4 of the matches going to game 3 as it turns out. Really shows that right now we have a lot of very close matchups in standard right now. A lot of, as you kind of see here, it's their games of inches in a lot of ways. Especially when you play these like Thragtusky decks against each other. There's a fair amount of play to the matchups, and I'd say there's no one matchup that tends to dominate.
Yeah,
one deck that dominates another one.
It's a format of like 60-40s and 55-45s.
Exactly.
There aren't 80-20s in this format.
Right. Later today, I think when we play Legacy, we'll see plenty of things that actually are 80-20s.
Absolutely. And some of those will be fun, but lots of room for knowledge of how the matchup works and what's really important in it to dominate in these.
I would say
situations.
As your card pool, there's a general thing in formats. As your card pool gets bigger, formats tends to get more extreme. You'll see in a block constructed format, it's almost always the case that your matchups are almost 50-50s across the board, and that'll be due to the fact that a lot of the decks are playing a lot of the same cards.
Yep.
In standard, we don't have as much overlap in decks, but you do still see, it's not uncommon to see 8 Thragtusks in a match, like between the 2 decks. That's a fairly common thing, and as you start to see a lot of the same cards battling, then matchups tend to kind of stay closer to the 50% line.
But as you get bigger, you have more diversity of cards, but also more diversity of strategies.
Right. For example, one of the things I always say, in Legacy, you'll get like something like Enchantress versus Ad Nauseam. Something which 2 great decks, but like certainly not a 50-50 matchup. You'll see things like that develop. Whereas, there's no match in standard with like as severe of a matchup, let's say, as that matchup would be.
Absolutely. So looks like we're getting close to finishing shuffling up for game 3. We're just going to get one last pile shuffle in from both players. They want to both make sure that they're presenting 60-card decks and that they haven't accidentally sideboarded out an extra card or sideboarded in an extra card. Both players want to make sure that they don't have any sort of shenanigans or game losses that would decide things other than through play. So we're going to shuffle up. We'll hopefully be able to both keep our 7-card hands and have a really interesting game 3 to decide who goes on to the semifinals here.
Yeah. Yeah, so in the matchup, so when looking at a game 3, what Toby's trying to do is going to basically try to do is, it's interesting. A lot of times Jund becomes a more reactive deck, where Jund, it tends to be all answers and then win with a random, not random, but really like Jund doesn't care if it wins with a Thrag Tusk or a Huntmaster or an Olivia. What's more important to the Jund strategy is that it has sufficient removal spells to deal with what its opponent's doing. What's really interesting about this matchup is that Cedric's threats are big enough and powerful enough that Jund really has trouble operating on that game plan. Actually just holding removal spells or answers for everything that Cedric does is pretty hard for the deck. Mm-hmm. So at some point, Toby, when he's looking for a strategy, is looking to basically, play something like an Olivia, play some sort of game-ending threat he needs to actually control the game with his threats as opposed to controlling the game with his removal.
So it looks like Cedric has kept here, and Toby is taking a mulligan to 6. Cedric's on the play. Didn't see everything in his hand, but he definitely has at least 3 lands in there. I saw a Blood Crypton, Rootbound Crag, and another land. And he does have a Dreadbore in his hand for an early Olivia Voldaren.
Yeah, an early one, a late one, a middle one. Really, the Dreadbores in this matchup for Cedric's deck pretty much read, whenever possible, save for Olivia Voldaren.
Yeah. Think there's a gold card in his hand. It's probably a Gore Clan Rampager. It's got kind of dark art, but it might be a Falcon Wrath Aristocrat. So he's got some gas in there, but I didn't see an Arbor Elf. I didn't see a Gyre Sage. It doesn't look like he has a really explosive opening start, but it's certainly possible for that to change rapidly. The top of the deck, might offer up a Gyre Sage and then a Burning Tree Emissary, and suddenly we have 4 drops on turn 3.
On that line, I don't think Cedric cares as much about the early creatures in this matchup. There are a lot of removal spells that, because Toby has a critical mass of removal spells, Cedric's ability to actually curve him out is pretty low. Mm-hmm. So I think what Cedric would rather have is a hand of hard hitters than a really streamlined curve-based hand. So if Cedric's hand, is really just like a turn 1 Arbor Elf with, maybe if his hand was, an Arbor Elf with like a bunch of 4-drops, that's probably an okay hand, or something along that line. The clunkier, bigger hands are probably maybe even preferable to Cedric.
Yeah, Cedric wants to see Thundermaw Hellkites.
He wants to see, like multiple Thundermaw Hellkites is perfect
like the
for this
card
matchup.
that he is most excited about if he's got the mana to cast it. And it's nice but incidental if he has early pressure on Toby. So Toby is shuffled up, presented to Cedric, and we're going to get to see his 6-card hand here. And we're going to roll a little bit of it. So there's a Victim of Night. There looks like 3 lands: Victim of Night, Curse of Death's Hold, and a 4th land.
Right, so this is one of those, kind of all-control answer hands, which are pretty dangerous for Toby. Because he's on a 6-card hand, I don't know if he doesn't have really the luxury to mulligan it, but he can't be very happy with how that hand looks.
And Cedric was hiding an Arbor Elf in there at some point, so he leads with that off of a Stomping Ground going at 18. And Toby's just going to play a tap Blood Crypt and pass.
Right, Toby has the acceleration, but he doesn't really have anything to accelerate into right now.
And so we see that Cedric did bring in the Domri Rad and plays that on turn 2, drawing a card off of it. Did you see what that is?
He got a Borderland Ranger off it.
Okay. And so Toby has a Farseek for turn 2. If he chooses to play that, plays a Woodland Cemetery, doesn't take any damage. He's going to accelerate, potentially be able to get out this Curse of Death's Hold on turn 4, which will shut off some of Cedric's creatures. We'll get rid of that Arbor Elf. But he's got to be concerned about that Domri building up an advantage for Cedric. And I think the ultimate from Domri is actually going to be really effective against Toby, and something that he needs to be concerned about. Putting pressure on Cedric to make sure that doesn't happen because of the hexproof that the ultimate gives Cedric's creatures. I think that gives him enough inevitability in that it shuts off a lot of Toby's deck.
I mean, if Cedric makes an emblem here, Toby doesn't really recover from that.
Yeah.
Just want to let you know we are sign-ups for the Legacy Open that will begin at 10 o'clock. We currently have a very short line. Myself and John Carter are the ones taking registration for that. It is $40 cash. If you need an ATM, there's a bank half a block down the road where you can get your cash. Please have your DCI number ready when you come up to register. If you don't know your number, we can certainly look it up for you. And once you're done registering, you can start working on your deck list. We have those forms available up at the front.
1 second here,
and
we're waiting through
please be sure to
announcements.
sign the back of it as well for the consent for coverage. And if you brought your deck list from home, just grab one and fill up the back and we'll attach it to your deck list.
Okay. So we had some announcements over the loudspeaker. Cedric takes a turn, gets a Borderland Ranger, uses that to get a swamp. He's going to probably attack with the Arbor Elf and then use Domri to hopefully draw a card.
Because he knows, a lot of times he'd be tempted to play a protect the Planeswalker sort of game. Because he knows that Toby's deck plays Dreadbores, he's really just going to try to get as much value out of Domri Rod as possible.
And unfortunately, he misses on the Domri, so he's got a land or a Dreadbore or another Domri or something along those lines on the top of his deck. And so he gets in for one, passes it back to Toby. Is Toby drawing gas for the turn?
Well, Toby's a little heavy on lands right now. I don't know. He has this Curse of Deathhold, and I don't know if he has a Pillar of Flame.
Yeah.
Once again, he still is on an all removal plan.
So that Pillar of Flame, not a terribly great draw here. The creatures that Cedric has out aren't particularly impactful. So Toby just uses it to kill the Borderland Ranger, make sure that Cedric doesn't have an excessive clock. He knows that he's going to be able to play that Curse of Death's Hold to deal with the Arbor Elf, so he's not worried about that accelerating Cedric. And we're going to see the Arbor Elf get in one more time. Cedric's going to play the Swamp that he searched up, and we've got a 4-drop. Looks like the Gore Clan Rampager that we saw in his hand before.
Right, and this is a set that's capable of closing out the game. Toby has the Victim of Night for it, but especially because of Domri Rod, Cedric should be able to continue to play more threats than Toby can play answers.
Yep. We see Toby draw another Pillar of Flame. He's going to go ahead and cast the Curse of Death's Hold here. It's a better answer to the Arbor Elf.
Yeah, the interesting thing is he will most likely have to Pillar the Domri next turn.
Yep. He just can't afford for it to go ultimate. So Cedric draws another blank.
If you're in Cedric's position, you probably let the Domri go to 8 before making an emblem.
So Cedric draws a Burning Tree Emissary off of the Domri Rod. He's going to cast that right now, and the question is whether he has a follow-up to that that he can use the mana for. And so he's got a number of lands. He's got that Dreadbore that we've seen for a while, and it looks like that's it. It looks like he's got 3 lands and a Dreadbore left in his hand.
Yep.
So was that another land that we drew for Toby?
Unclear as of yet.
So there goes the pillar that you were talking about.
Yeah, he's gonna put a Domri. Toby really still just can't afford, Hex-proof Double Strike, Trample, and Haste is probably too much for his deck to deal with. It'll blank so many more. By having that happen, it'll blank so many more cards in Toby's hand that he's has to knock this at Domri down to 5.
So Cedric draws the forest that was on the top of his library. Then he uses Domri's plus ability. He draws an Arbor Elf off of that. The Arbor Elf, not actually a useful draw at all because of the Curse of Death's Hold, but he's happy to get it off the top of his deck and make his future draws live.
Yeah, so Cedric does not have any way to destroy Curse of Death's Hold, so that his Aristocrats and Arbor Elves, are not cards for the rest of the game.
Yep. Although, as we saw in Game 1, there's the potential to use the Aristocrat simply to evolve his other creatures. Like the Dire Sage he just drew off of Domri. So he's going to go ahead and cast that, get himself set up, and it looks like he drew a Flinthoof for the turn. So he's going to be able to cast that after the Gyre Sage, give it haste, evolve the Gyre Sage, and slowly build up a force of small creatures to ping Toby to death with.
Right, and that's actually the fourth card that Cedric has drawn off of Domri Rod this game, which really is showcasing the power of that Planeswalker against a removal-heavy control deck.
Yeah, so none of the cards Cedric has drawn off of it have been super impressive, but you can imagine how much further behind Cedric would be if he had to use all of his draw steps for that. He would be out of the game without Domri, and now with it threatening to go ultimate, he has the potential to just be super far ahead, even though like the individual cards that it's gotten out before him haven't been super impressive. So Cedric appears is doing some math. He may have drawn a large creature. He may have drawn like a Thundermaw Hellkite. So we see him use Domri's -7 ability, giving all of his creatures hexproof and double strike and trample and haste. Then he casts a Flinthoof Boar, evolving his Gyre Sage, and he doesn't even have to pay red to give that Flinthoof Boar haste. He just gets in with all his guys. So he's going to be doing 7 damage here.
All right, and there will be a concession from Toby Cain.
Oh, sorry, 14 damage
14,
because of the double strike, which is exactly lethal.
So Cedric Phillips defeats Toby Cain 2-1, moves into the semifinals where he's awaiting the winner of Austin Tolkien and Jordan Judson, continuing his undefeated streak with another win over a mid-range deck.
Yeah, good job, Cedric.